Good morning. This is Hope Williams with NCICU, and I'm here with Wood Toms and with Chris Beal from MCNC. And we're delighted to have all of you on this morning for our first webinar for our IT directors and staff and any others at our campuses who are interested in talking about some of the issues we'd like to discuss. We want to make sure that we have time for Chris's presentation today and also for discussion, because we know that this phishing and ransomware, both of those are becoming more and more issues on our campuses, and certainly even in our office, much smaller than your campuses, but we are seeing evidence of this every day. And I know that in some cases, actually, one in particular I remember hearing about on one of our campuses, the ransomware actually shut down one of our business offices for a couple of days while they were getting everything back on track. So we want to be aware of this. We want to help provide as much information as we can and have time for people to discuss. I think one of the most valuable things is to be able to have time to discuss things among campuses about what's going on and how people are dealing with things. We'll also be meeting in October with IT directors, and we'll have more time to talk about issues there on Guilford College campus, any perceived information about that. But please be thinking during this webinar about other information you'd like to have and other webinars you'd like to set up. When we sent out a survey, this was really the #1 issue that folks were interested in, and I really want to thank Chris Beal, our Chief Information Security Officer with MCNC, for his willingness to set up a presentation for us today. And I am going to stop now and turn that over to you, Chris. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hope. You can all hear me okay. I think we have the chat window available. If you're having any issues connecting or hearing anything, you can just pop a note into that chat, and I think we'll be able to see it, and hopefully we can get it taken care of. But as Hope said, we do want to talk about phishing and ransomware today. I am Chris Beal. I'm the CISO with MCNC. And what we're going to cover today, we can't talk about phishing without talking about spam a little bit first. So we're going to talk some about spam, and then we are going to talk about phishing, what it is, how it works, and how you can protect yourself. We're also going to talk about just some general email protection concepts that will help protect you from all sorts of email problems, including phishing. And then at the end, we're going to spend some time talking about ransomware, and in particular how that relates to phishing, and most importantly, what you can do to protect yourself against the threat of ransomware. So we'll start off by talking about spam. What is spam? Spam generally is defined as any kind of unsolicited or junk email. More broadly, it can also be considered any email message that is not legitimate or that is not wanted by the recipient. And if you think about what kinds of email messages a recipient may want to receive, you have to think about that what one person might want is something that another person might not want. So spam is a subjective thing, because what I might want might be something that is not what you want to receive in your inbox. And because it is subjective, that's a big reason why it's tricky to block spam. It's hard to apply blanket controls that will filter everything, because you do get into this subjective nature of what people actually want to receive in their inbox. So I've got some examples of spam emails here. This one is pretty spammy. Clearly, I don't think this is the kind of thing that anyone would want to receive in their inbox. So this is one that is pretty easy to filter out. This is another one that I received in my inbox that my email program marked as spam. And you can see this is a cold call email that's asking me if I was interested in email leads for networking administrators, offering to allow me to purchase a mailing list. This is, to me, spam, something I'm not interested in. But if I'm in sales and it's my job to find new people I can reach out to sell networking equipment to, this might be something that I would be interested in receiving. This is an email that is advertising a conference that's coming up. I'm not interested in this particular conference, so this is something that to me is spam or junk. But for some people, they might be interested in attending this conference, and they might be happy to receive this message and learn about something that wasn't on their radar. This is another spam email that I received, Walgreens flyer, but some people might be very interested in getting weekly deals from Walgreens. So you can see why it's very subjective and very tricky, and it's a personal thing as to whether or not a particular message is considered spam or not. So we want to talk a little bit about some just trends in email. The data that I'm going to show you here comes from a Internet Security Threat Report from Symantec. They put this out on an annual basis. This one came out in April of 2017. It's the most recent one. And it covers data throughout the calendar year of 2016. So you can see here in this graphic that in 2014, the global spam rate that was observed by Symantec and all the threat intelligence that they gather was about 60% of all emails sent over the internet were considered spam. And that percentage went down in 2015 to 53% and then stayed at 53% in 2016. So the message there is that, oh, it's getting better. There's less spam being sent on the internet on a percentage basis. And also with phishing, in 2014, 1 out of every 965 messages was considered a phishing email. In 2015, that rate dropped significantly, so only 1 out of every 1,800 was considered a phishing email, and then continued to drop significantly. 1 out of every 2,600 roughly was a phishing email. So you may look at that and think, well, wow, things are getting better. Spam is going down, the phishing rate is decreasing, so the email situation must be getting better. But what we can see in the next piece of information here is that in 2014, 1 out of every 250 roughly messages contained malware, and then we fast forward to 2016, and that has increased to 1 out of every 131 messages. So the malware rate is actually going up while the other rates are going down. And Symantec in 2014 in emails observed 275 million new email variants, and moving forward to 2016, they observed 357 million new malware variants. So not only is the amount of malware increasing, the variety is also increasing as well. And then they also found that the rate of bots that were observed generating all of this spam increased pretty significantly in 2016 as well. Now, one of the key findings in this report said that targeted spear phishing campaigns, rather than mass mailing phishing campaigns of old, are what are favored now by attackers. And this helps explain that drop in the phishing rate. So the rate fell from 1 in every 1,800 over to 1 in every 2,600, but that's because the attackers are getting more selective. They're not using mass blasting techniques that they had used in the past. They're now being more targeted about the messages that they send. And we're going to talk more about spear phishing in a moment. But before we get into spear phishing, let's talk about what phishing is generally. Phishing emails are emails that you receive that are designed to trick you into revealing sensitive or confidential information. And this includes things like passwords, credit card information, bank account information, or some other piece of sensitive company information. So the phishing email is designed to trick you into giving up that information that is sensitive. So the question is, does phishing work? This is studies a couple of years old now. It's from 2014 that Google did, but I think the numbers are still holding pretty constant. And what this study found is that the best phishing pages, the most believable ones that attackers create, trick users about 45% of the time. But even the worst ones, the ones like that spam I showed you early on about the Russian pharmacy, even the ones that are obviously scams, trick users 3% of the time. And if you go back and look at that global volume of data, we're talking about billions of messages that are being sent. If 3% of the time users are falling for those scams, at that volume you can see that there's quite a large number of phishing compromises that are successful even in these very, very poorly constructed phishing attempts. And the other thing that this particular study found is that hijackers move quickly. They found that about 20% of the accounts that they observed to be compromised via phishing, the attackers were using those accounts to try to log in within 30 minutes of that phish happening. So once the attacker is successful in getting that sensitive information, they're moving pretty quickly to try to use it right away. So let's talk about some characteristics of phishing emails. The first characteristic is that they generally appear to come from a trusted source. So that could be someone in a position of authority within your organization, such as a CEO or a CFO or someone in the IT department or a vice president of a business unit or a head of a business unit. So the email is going to come and it's going to look like it came from someone in a position of authority. It might also look like it comes from a bank or a credit card company. That's a quite an often used technique by scammers, is they'll send an email that looks like it's coming from your bank. Also, they'll often send them from appearing to come from an organization that you do business with. So this might be something like Amazon, where you make purchases from. It might be a shipping company like FedEx or UPS that you're doing business with. So they'll spoof those because they know there's a decent percentage chance that you're working with one of those organizations and regularly receive emails from those folks. Another characteristic of phishing emails is that the attacker works to create a sense of urgency. They want you to do something and they want you to feel like that you need to do it quickly. So you'll see things, language in these emails like, we detected some suspicious activity, or your account is going to be deactivated and you need to verify your information in order to keep access. And if you don't do that, you're going to lose access. So they create this sense of urgency that makes you think you need to move quickly. And then another characteristic is they want you to click on a link to take some action. And we'll show you some examples of this here in a moment. So this is one that appears to come from a bank. You may or may not do business with SunTrust, but if you do, you get this in your inbox. This message is telling you that, hey, we detected a $1,000 transfer coming out of your account, and there's a helpful link there that says, if you did not authorize this, click here to cancel this transfer. So if you bank with SunTrust and you get this message saying $1,000 is going out, your inclination is going to be that, well, that's not right. I need to let them know that that's false, and I'm going to click on the link to do that. This is one that appears to come from Amazon.com, and it says, we identified a problem with your account and we're limiting your access. Your access to Amazon is going to be blocked until you resolve the problem, and click on this link to fix the problem. So again, they're trying to trick you into clicking that link. This is an example that appears to come from FedEx that says, we have a message for you. Click here to view the message. If you're someone who does shipping with FedEx regularly, you may receive messages like this, and so it might be second nature to you to click on the message and say, well, let me view what FedEx is trying to tell me. This one is another one that from Amazon. It says, we couldn't process your order. We need you to log in and click here to address the issue. So if you've recently ordered something from Amazon, you obviously don't want there to be a problem with the order, so you're going to be inclined to click on the link to fix whatever the issue is. Here's one that would be near and dear to a lot of folks' heart. Your Netflix account has been suspended, and unless you click here to update your account information, you're not going to be able to watch Netflix. So a lot of folks would be very anxious about not having access to Netflix and want to get that sorted out right away. Here's another one from Amazon. It's an email that's confirming your order, $700 for a Sony TV. If you order things from Amazon regularly and you received an email like this, you'd probably be inclined to say, well, I didn't order a TV. Let me click and figure out what's going on. So these are just some examples of ways that attackers are trying to trick you. Here's another one that's a AT&T bill telling you that your bill's come and you owe $1,700. Most folks would be concerned about a $1,700 phone payment, so they would probably want to log in and verify what was going on. This is another common example that we see for any folks out there that use Google Docs. Normally what happens when you share a document with someone, the default behavior is that once you complete the sharing, it will send that person an email to let them know that they have a document that has been shared with them. And so usually it looks something like this that says, you received this in your inbox that says someone shared an item with you, and there's a link you can click on to access the item that's been shared. And if you're not currently logged into Google Docs, what happens when you click the link is that you get a login page asking you to sign in. So what you have happening a lot with phishing is attackers will create these fake emails and send them and say a document's been shared, and the link will point to a page that looks like the Google Docs login but is not the Google login. It will collect your login credentials and send them to the attacker, and they now have access to your Google account. So this is a very common technique that's used as well. And this one can be particularly tricky because Google offers services to host documents and forms, and so what we've seen is attackers will use those services to host their fake login pages so that it's difficult for users to know, because when they click on the link, they're actually going to a Google site that is secured with a Google SSL certificate. So it can be tricky for them to determine that it's not a legitimate login page, because all the signs point to this is a page that is provided by Google. So this is when you have to be particularly wary of. So we mentioned a term earlier, spear phishing, and you'll sometimes see this referred to as whaling, although that's a term that we don't see used a whole lot anymore, but if you do see it, it refers to spear phishing. So we want to talk about what that is. So spear phishing is a phishing attack that is very targeted, and it contains contextual information instead of just random information. So instead of receiving something out of the blue from Netflix or Amazon or a bank, you may receive something from someone that you think you know, someone in your organization. And these are harder to detect because the context makes the messages seem more genuine. And oftentimes in a spear phishing email, the request might be a little different. So rather than a message that says click on a link to access something, they may be asking you to perform some action or to reply to the message and provide some information. So we've got some examples of that. So this is one that says, please find the banking instructions attached, and we need to process a transfer immediately. I'm busy now, but I'll call you back within the hour regarding payment. So common thing, we see this a lot in universities where people in the finance office will receive a message like this saying that appears to come from someone within the organization, a provost or something like that, saying I need you to process this transfer. We get these a lot in our accounting department that appear to come from our CEO saying please transfer some money here to this spot. This is another example that says, hope you had a good weekend. Do you have PDF copies of all the employees' W-2s? Could you email them to me for a quick review? And the W-2 information, we see this a lot around leading up to tax season because attackers will collect these W-2s and then use them to file false tax returns and collect the refund money before the victim is actually able to file their legitimate tax return. So again, there's no link to click on here. It's just a request for sensitive information. We see this a lot in university settings as well, and again, it's used for tax fraud. This is one that we actually had happen here at MCNC. You can see at the top, it appears to come from Patricia Moody, and Patricia is our CFO, and this was actually sent to someone in our accounting department. It says, morning, hope you have a splendid day. I want you to quickly email me the details you'll need to help me process a wire transfer to another bank. The person in the accounting department immediately was suspicious of this email because she said it was way too nice. That any email like this coming from our CFO would have not been nearly this nice. And I got the headers from this one, and we can pick it apart. So just highlight a few things about it. So you can see here at the top is this return path. So this is the actual email address that the message came from. So even though it claimed to come from our CFO, you can see it actually came from an address, eric@tampabaywineandfood.com. So this is an email account that had been compromised and was used by the attacker to send out this particular phishing message. Down here in the from, you can see where they set this header to make it appear that it came from our CFO. And the reply to, if our employee had replied to that message, you can see it says it's going to Patricia Moody, but the email address is controller1134@yahoo.com. So this is a message that would have gone back to an account that was under control of the attacker. So that's just a little pulling back the curtain and seeing what's going on behind the scenes. But this is the way that these folks utilize these phishing messages in a targeted way to try to get information out of folks. So how do we protect ourselves against phishing? One way is clearly to turn off your email, but that's not really effective for most people in terms of getting their jobs done. So we have to think about realistic ways. One of the most important things to look at when thinking about phishing emails is looking at human behavior. And so I want to go through a few things here that as organizations we should be cognizant of with regard to how we want employees to behave. And the first thing is making sure that any official behavior that the institution undertakes is good behavior. So a great example of this is if we say as an organization that our help desk will not ask for passwords, then make sure that they don't do that. We see a lot of cases where a company will say we will never ask for your password, but then when an issue occurs, one of the first things that happens is the help desk person will say, well, tell me what your password is, or email it over to me and I'll take care of the issue. So we need to follow our policies. If we say we don't do that, we need to make sure that we don't do it because we want to reinforce good behavior for our users. The next one is don't send out emails that look spammy. I can't tell you how many times working with organizations where there are actually legitimate official communications that are coming out that violate the rules that we teach employees. It'll contain maybe a link that doesn't point to a system that belongs to the organization. Maybe it points to a system outside the organization. So immediately, we're raising the suspicion of our end users that are receiving these emails. So we want to make sure that as we send out emails, we're following good email behavior. One way to do that is to create official communication models and use them consistently. So what I mean here is that establish formal mechanisms that say this is the way that we're going to communicate with employees via email. And when we actually need to communicate with them, we're going to use these models that we set up, and we're not going to go around them. They're not going to be receiving emails from outside parties that look like they're coming from the university. That's something that happens a lot. So make sure you're following those models to reinforce good behavior for employees. And don't use SSL certificates that generate user errors. This is a common one that we see where we'll point users to an internal system that maybe has a self-signed certificate that when the users click on a link, immediately the first thing they're greeted with is a warning that the SSL certificate isn't valid or isn't signed or isn't trusted. And we don't want to teach users to just click through those warning messages. We want to teach them that when they encounter that message, that's a problem. So doing that as well. Establishing and enforcing formal policies is a really good thing to do. Set up procedures that govern how you handle these requests for money transfers, for releasing sensitive information like W-2s, and make sure that those kind of things require approvals and don't rely on just someone in the department receiving an email saying, hey, send me this. Because if you have those formal procedures in place and they require approvals, then when your employees get those requests in an email that says, hey, process this bank transfer or send me the W-2s, they will know that those messages are not legitimate because they're not following your formal policy. And we want to teach our users good behavior. So we want to provide a way to communicate with users about latest threats, so that if as a university there's a phishing campaign that's being conducted and we see a lot of users being targeted, we can relay that information to users. So folks that haven't been targeted yet will have a heads up that, hey, if you see something like this, it's not legitimate. So providing ways to communicate regularly with users about those incoming threats is a good thing to do. Teaching users to hover over links in email to reveal the true destination. This is a very common technique, and certainly it's not foolproof, but the more people we can get doing this, the better off we will be. So this is when they get an email that says your Netflix account's been deactivated, click here to reactivate it, teaching them just to put their mouse on that link and hover over it. And if it's not actually going to netflix.com or wherever the destination is supposed to be, that teaching them that they should be suspicious of that. Looking closely at email addresses and message details. So in the example I showed you earlier with the MCNC phishing email, if a user had looked at the reply email address, they would have seen that it wasn't going back to an MCNC address, it was going to that Yahoo address. So that's something that's visible to end users. So teaching them to look for details like that, in addition to looking at the links, is a helpful thing to do. This one, it's a good thing to do in practice. Users you're never going to prevent users from clicking on links, but again, getting users to think before they click is a good thing to do, and using known good addresses. So as an example, if they get an email that says their password has expired, click here to reactivate it, rather than clicking on the link that's in the message, teaching them to open the browser and go to the address that they know is a good address, rather than clicking on a link. That's a good thing to try to get users to do. And this one is good. Teaching users to be suspicious of emails from authority figures that demand immediate action. So, or the CEO that says, I need you to do this right now. Teaching users that they should be suspicious of that is a good thing to do. And that requires some discipline from the organization, because that means that these folks who are in these authority positions need to behave in manners that don't ask employees to do that don't put them in those positions. And then again, this goes back to setting up those formal policies for how we handle sensitive information. So doing that and getting our authority figures to honor those policies is something that really should be done. And again, teaching users not to be afraid to ask questions or to confirm that something is legitimate. This is something we absolutely want to do. We want to teach our users that it's okay to ask questions if they're not sure about an email. So that, again, this goes back to teaching the folks in authority that it's okay if users are asking questions. That's a good thing. We want them to do that. We want them to confirm what they're doing. And lastly, teaching users that we want them to report anything suspicious, especially if they think that they've fallen for a scam. They clicked on a link and now they're maybe thinking, I shouldn't have done that. We want to know that. So we want, rather than to punish those folks for clicking on the link, we want to tell them, we want you to report it. So setting up mechanisms that allow those reports to come in is something absolutely that you want to do, because you might have one person that fell for it, but if they report it, maybe you can stop a whole lot more people from falling for it as well. Rewarding good behavior. So this is kind of what I was alluding to just now. More carrot, less stick. We want to provide training and education, but don't punish people, because again, we want them to feel comfortable coming forward and saying, hey, I think something's wrong here. Even if they did something that they probably shouldn't have done, we still want to know about it. It's better for us to know. Setting up a mechanism for users to report phishing and spam and then reward them for doing that. This is a really simple way to help out with that. So a common technique for this is to create an email box. We have one at MCNC called Bad Mail. A lot of people will have one called Phishing or Spam, something like that. And telling people, if you get a message that doesn't look legitimate to you, go ahead and send it to this known email address. And then you have multiple folks that can monitor that email box, who can examine the messages that are coming in and decide if there's some action that needs to be taken about that. And then reward them for doing it. So one of the things that we do at MCNC is we have periodic contests. So everyone who catches a phish or a spam and reports it, every time they do that, they get their name entered into a drawing, and we'll give out little prizes, nothing big. But that's a really good technique to goes a long way to encouraging people to submit those reports. Operating appropriate technical controls. Sorry, not too fast. Having your gateway spam and malware protection, having spam and malware protection on your endpoints, and then the last one is requiring multi-factor authentication for access to email and remote access to systems and networks. So this one's really important because one of the big things that phishers are trying to do is to steal credentials. And they use those credentials to then conduct further attacks against your institution. So if you have multi-factor authentication in place, even if the attackers are successful with a phishing email in getting a user to give up their username and password, they can't use that username and password to then log back into your systems if you have multi-factor authentication in place. So this multi-factor authentication is one of the best things you can do to help protect against the threat of phishing and spear phishing. So I'm not going to spend a long time on these, but I wanted to make you familiar with them, some terms and technologies that are helpful in preventing spam and phishing. The first one is called SPF, or Sender Policy Framework. This allows you as the owner of a domain to specify which email servers are allowed to send email on your behalf. So this does a couple of things for you as an institution. Number one, it helps protect your users because you can implement controls that say if emails come in that claim to be from my institution, but they didn't come from one of these servers that I said are good servers, then you can just throw those away. So all these spoofing messages that are coming from the outside can be thrown away because you know they didn't come from a legitimate email source. Also, it allows other people from other institutions to know what are the email systems that they should expect emails that legitimately come from you to come from. And they can also take actions if they see messages that are coming from somewhere that claim to be from you but are not from one of your legitimate servers. They can choose not to accept those. So that's what SPF is, and there's some references here that I included in the presentation, and we'll make the presentation available so you can get those references if you want to know more about SPF. DKIM is another one, Domain Keys Identified Mail. This builds on SPF, and it allows a mechanism for the recipient to check that mail that claims to come from a specific domain was indeed authorized by the owner of the domain. So this goes a little further than SPF, and it actually uses cryptographic keys so that when you send messages from your legitimate domain, you sign those messages, and then the recipient can do a verification check against that cryptographic signature, and then they can know with certainty that the message actually came from you. So that's DKIM is something that can be implemented. And the last one is something called DMARC, and this builds on top of both SPF and DKIM, and it allows you as a sender or a domain owner to specify policies on how recipients should behave if a message fails SPF or DKIM checks. So with just SPF or DKIM, the recipients can make their own decisions about what to do. With DMARC, you can define what you want to happen to those messages, and if the recipient follows DMARC, then they will know, okay, this is what the recipient wants me to do with this particular message in this circumstance. So I'm going to go through some information that's real-world, evidence-based results on implementing different email controls and email protections and how good they are found to be or not be out in the real world. So this comes from a report that came out last year from the Australian Department of Defense, their Defense Signals Directorate, which that group does a lot of really good work in cybersecurity. And there's a link down at the bottom there where you can go read the report. If you're interested in email protection, I encourage you to take a look at it. So again, what they did was look at all the available email protection controls, and they tell you, based on their research, how effective they are in the real world. So for verifying a sender, what they found is that implementing DMARC to enhance SPF and DKIM had good effectiveness. Average effectiveness, they found that simply blocking email on a SPF hard fail or blocking email on a DKIM fail, that was average in terms of being effective at preventing spam and phishing. Minimal effectiveness was blocking just based off a spam blacklist, and that's because attackers are putting up new domains so quickly that it's really hard for the blacklist to keep up. So they found that was minimally effective, and then quarantining email based on an SPF soft fail. Poor effectiveness, they found that simply flagging an email on a soft fail or marking external emails. And what this means is that putting some visual indicator to your users that anytime they get an email message in their inbox, that message came from someone outside the organization. They found that really wasn't all that effective in preventing people from falling for spam and phishing messages. So for protections on the message body, they found that replacing web addresses in a message body with a non-active version had good effectiveness. And what that means is that you're going to take the links that are in an email and you're going to make them not clickable. So you're going to neuter that link, as it were. They found that had good effectiveness. Teaching users to hover over the links to reveal the actual destination, they found that had good effectiveness. They found that removing JavaScript or VBScript or other active content from the message body entirely only had average effectiveness, and I think that's because attackers really aren't using that as a primary technique for compromise. So if we talk about filtering email attachments, this report found that this set of things had excellent effectiveness. The first one is converting attachments to another file type. So that would be if a Word document was attached, rather than delivering the end user the Word document, you convert it to a PDF or something like that, and that's what gets delivered to the end user. Whitelisting attachments based on the type of file, they found that to be excellent. Blocking any password protected or encrypted attachments. So this is a technique attackers will use to get their message through your gateway. They'll zip the file or encrypt it so that it can't be inspected, and then they'll send the password to the user in the body of the message and instruct them, open the file, here's the password. So blocking any of those type of files. Dynamically analyzing attachments in a sandbox. So this would be a technology such as FireEye, where the message would be sent into this sandbox where it can actually be opened and detonated, and they can watch what behaviors occur, and if it turns out it does something malicious, then they would not be delivered to the recipient. And then lastly, removing any active content from any attachments. So if a Word document or an Excel document that was attached contained a macro or a script, that would get stripped out. Good effectiveness, they found inspecting archive files. So rather than just allowing zip files or tar files through as email attachments, you want to open them up and make sure that the files that are contained in the archive actually get scanned before sending it on to the end user. Whitelisting attachments based simply on file extension, they found was just average and minimal. They found that blacklisting attachments based on the type, so this would be like blocking all exe files or zip files or something like that. Scanning attachments using antivirus software and blacklisting attachments based on file extension, they found those to have minimal effectiveness. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do those things, but what you shouldn't do is feel comfortable that because you implemented only those that you're going to be safe. So again, here's those references that I mentioned earlier. You'll be able to get the copy of the presentation at the end and go take a look at those if you want more information on any of those. So back to the trend report. One of the other key findings in this report was that the malware rate increased significantly in 2016. So we talked about that earlier. And what they found was that the increase was driven primarily by botnets used to deliver spam campaigns related to threats such as Locky, Dridex, and TeslaCrypt. And if anyone is familiar with those types of malware, you know that those are all ransomware. So email compromises are being used to deliver spam, which is containing ransomware. And the way that works is that the user will receive an email disguised as some kind of notification, either an invoice or a receipt, or perhaps a resume, something like that. And that attachment appears to be a PDF or a Word document, but it's actually a JavaScript command that will connect out to the internet and download the ransomware. And then the machine will become infected, and the user has to pay the ransom in order to get their data back. So that's the common method where email is used to deliver ransomware. So let's talk about what ransomware is. So ransomware is malware that encrypts files on your computer and keeps the decryption key away from you so that you can no longer access your files. And if you would like to get the key that will decrypt the files so that you can access them again, you have to pay the attacker some money in order to get access to your files again. So this is a very common piece of ransomware called CryptoLocker. It will pop a screen like this up on your monitor that tells you your files are encrypted and tell you how much time you have left before the data is destroyed forever, and you're prompted to click through and follow the payment instructions for how you're going to pay to get your data back. This is another example of one. Looks very official with all the U.S. government logos at the top, but it's another form of ransomware. This is yet another one that is telling you your personal files are encrypted. Also has the countdown timer, again, creating this sense of urgency in order to get your data back. Ransomware has been in the news a lot. I'm not going to talk through all of these, but you can see on the first one there, hospital in California ended up paying a large sum of money to ransomware because machines that they were using to conduct patient-related care activities were compromised, and a lot of their systems that they needed to access to process patients and treat patients were unavailable to them. Horry County Schools in South Carolina, this is one that made a lot of news. K-12 school that ended up paying attackers in order to get access to their data. And then this one here in the middle, this was the WannaCry outbreak that happened over the summer. That was all over the news, and it hit UK hospitals particularly hard. This is an actual photograph that was taken of one of the machines in a hospital in the UK, popping up that screen telling that your files are encrypted and you have to pay some money via Bitcoin to get the data back. And it really took a toll on hospital systems across the UK. And this is a quote here from a physician in London. He got a text message saying, "Major internal incident declared due to national IT failure. Currently on stroke and trauma divert, no pathology services available, including blood transfusion." So this wasn't just a case of a nuisance. This was a case that was actually shutting down life-providing operations and turning people away. So it's a pretty serious situation. And if any of your universities are attached to healthcare systems, this will be a big concern for you in that particular context. So how does ransomware spread? It spreads just like any other malware. Malicious files, might be a Word document or a PDF. It also can spread via worm-like behavior. This is what we saw happen with WannaCry, where machines got infected, and rather than spread the infection via sending out emails, it actually found all the computers on the same network that it could talk to, and it utilized a vulnerability in Microsoft Windows to infect those machines just by communicating with them over the network. Bad emails, we've seen that already from the Symantec report. Malicious websites, so attackers are, when a user clicks on a link in a phishing message, it takes them to a website that will infect their computer with the ransomware. And lastly, watering hole attacks. So this is an attack that happens by compromising a website that people are known to visit. It might be a popular site on the internet. It might be a corporate intranet. So this is a common technique where attackers will plant the malware on a site that they know people are going to go to, and then when people go to it, they get infected. So how can you protect your systems from ransomware? The best protection, without a doubt, against ransomware is making sure that you have good backups of your data. I can't stress this enough. You want to make sure that you're backing up frequently, and that you're actually creating backups or archives that can be restored. And I mentioned this point here versus file sync because a lot of times we encounter folks that think, oh, I have Dropbox, I have Box, I have Google Drive, so I'm covered from a backup perspective. But those file sync services are designed to propagate changes that happen on one machine out to all the locations. So if your computer gets compromised with ransomware and your data gets encrypted, those encrypted files, those changes to that file are going to get synced to all the locations that are using the sync service. So those services are primarily designed to sync changes, not to provide backups. So some of the services provide you a mechanism where you can go back and pull a previous version, but not all of them. So we encourage people to think about that as they're thinking about their backup strategy, not to just assume that because you have one of those services that you have a backup. Verifying your backups. This is really important. I cannot tell you how many times we talk to folks, not just in a ransomware scenario, but in a disaster recovery scenario, where they think they have good backups. And when they need to use those backups, they haven't tested them, and then they go to use them, and those backups are not usable for them. We encountered that scenario just a few weeks ago with a K-12 school system that we were working with. They got hit by ransomware. We asked them, do you have backups? They said, yeah, absolutely. They went to the backup server and found out that the backups, because they were on the network, they were Windows systems on the network, those backups had all been encrypted as well and were not available to them. So verifying that your backups are offline and verifying that they are actually good is a really important step. And I would encourage you to consider automated solutions for your workstation backups. There's a number of solutions that exist that take all of the work out of it. CrashPlan, Backblaze, SpiderOak, Carbonite, Mozy. All of those solutions provide a client that installs on the workstation. Once it's set up initially, it backs up continuously in the background and it sends all that data to the cloud. So you as an administrator don't have to think about it. Your end users don't have to think about it. It just happens. You still need to do some verification periodically to make sure that everything is working okay, but there's no action that you have to take. It's just happening behind the scenes. So those solutions are really good. So aside from backups, you want to make sure that your endpoints are protected, making sure that you're installing the latest security patches. The WannaCry outbreak that happened, again, I mentioned it leveraged a Windows vulnerability. There was a patch that had been out for that vulnerability for at least 2 months prior to the WannaCry outbreak. So if you had installed that patch in that 2-month window, your system was not vulnerable to WannaCry. So making sure that you keep current on your security patches, whether it's Windows, Mac, Linux, for the operating system and also for your applications. So Microsoft Office, your email programs, your PDF programs, Adobe, Flash, Java, those things, making sure that you're patching those is really good. Traditional antivirus is important. This is your endpoint antivirus, from your traditional vendors. Also, next-gen endpoint protection is something you can consider. There's some vendors listed there. The primary difference between those is usually that your traditional antivirus is signature-based, so they're going to detect files that are known to be bad. And your next-gen is usually doesn't rely on signatures. It's usually using some kind of machine learning or artificial intelligence to do behavior analysis or looking at characteristics of files to determine ahead of time that this looks like it might be bad. And then lastly, taking away local administrator rights. This, I can tell you from firsthand experience, goes a really long way to helping keep your machines protected, because malware often relies on the fact that if the user will click on it and it runs in the context of that user has admin rights, and so the malware now has admin rights on the system to do whatever it needs to do. If your users do not have local administrator rights, even if they click on and run that malware, the malware may not be able to infect the system. Email protection, we talked about this already. Web protection, so utilizing technology that's blocking categories of sites, that's inspecting websites to determine if they're known bad, or filtering out malicious content from your web tunnels. That's a great thing to do. And then I'm just mentioning here watching out for SSL tunnels. So a lot of times folks think that, well, I have a proxy in place and it's doing malware inspection, so I'm good. If that proxy is not inspecting content inside of an SSL tunnel, attackers will leverage that to send their malicious content through the tunnel because it can't be inspected. So making sure that you've accounted for that loophole in your protection scheme. And then lastly, traditional network security, things such as IDS, IPS, next-gen firewalls. least privilege traffic filtering. Doing all of those things can also help protect you against ransomware. Controlling access permissions. So I mentioned this, making sure that you are enforcing least privilege across your environment so that on your file servers, not everyone has access to write into every directory, because if they do, if a user gets infected with malware, that malware is going to spread really fast across your file systems, which means that it will spread to other users in your environment as well. So really taking that least privilege approach to say you're only going to grant the least amount of rights to a user that they need to do their job. That will help you in containing any outbreaks of malware or ransomware that you might have in your environment. Another technique that we see used a lot to detect the presence of ransomware is canary files. So oftentimes what happens with a ransomware infection is that it will infect files in a alphabetical manner. It will do a programmatic listing of all the files in a directory or in a file system, and it will start with the early ones. So you can create a file that will always appear near the beginning of that list and monitor for any changes to that file. So it's not a file that users would interact with on really any kind of basis. Most users wouldn't even know it's there. So if you see a change to that file, because it's near the top of the list, you know that this is something I should investigate and be suspicious of and have some kind of alerting set up for that. Backups, I mentioned already. Backups. I cannot stress to you enough the importance of having good backups as your ransomware protection mechanism, because if you do get in a situation where you are compromised with ransomware, you got to figure out how to recover. So let's talk about recovery. You want to contain infected systems. So any system that is infected, you want to isolate from the network as soon as possible. So this does a couple of things. It prevents that system from spreading the infection to other systems, and it also may prevent callbacks to the command and control infrastructure, which in some cases might actually save you from getting your files encrypted. Not in every case, not all ransomware works the same, but some of them rely on communicating back, phoning home to get that encryption key, and if they can't do that, then the encryption can't happen. If you do have good backups, a ransomware infection can be a minor inconvenience, because what you can do in that scenario is simply re-image the infected machine, restore that backup, and then you just move on. It might be an inconvenience to the IT staff and the end user, but it's a whole lot better than trying to build your entire network from scratch. If you don't have good backups, then you're immediately faced with a question of whether or not you're going to pay the ransom. I would suggest that this is the kind of thing you want to think about ahead of time and develop a policy about. That policy might be that we, under no circumstances, will pay a ransom. That policy might be that we're going to consider these on a case-by-case basis, and here is the person or the team of people that needs to do that considering. But that's a good thing to think about ahead of time, so you're not making it up on the fly while you're trying to recover from an incident. There are lots of reasons not to pay ransom. First is a practical concern about cryptocurrency. If you don't have a crypto wallet set up already, it may be difficult for you to actually obtain that currency before your timer runs out if you're not familiar with how to do that. It also might be the kind of thing where if you have a policy that says we may consider paying, you might want to set that up ahead of time and go ahead and have the cryptocurrency available. Number one, you can probably get it. You may be able to get it cheaper if you buy it today than it will be in 6 months. But just the practical concern of making sure it's available if you decide you want to use it. Another reason not to pay is that oftentimes payment does not lead to data recovery. We see this a lot with ransomware, where folks will pay the ransom and they never hear from the attackers again. So they don't get the key back to recover their data. So they pay the money and don't get anything back. This behavior also, it rewards the attackers and motivates future attacks. The reason they are conducting these attacks is to collect this money. And if they're successful in doing that, that motivates them to keep doing it. It also might make you an attractive future target. If the attackers know that you will pay, they will probably come back again and try to collect payment again. But I'm not going to tell you that you should or should not pay. Every situation is unique. We do have situations where if the company doesn't pay, they will go out of business. That's probably not the case for you as a university, but a lot of small businesses find themselves in that scenario. So they may make the decision that in order to keep the business going, they need to make the payment. So that's for you to decide. But just want to make you aware of these considerations ahead of time. If you don't pay, you might still have some recovery options. You can contact law enforcement. They may be able to offer you some help. Also, there's a website called No More Ransom that I want to make sure you're aware of. You can see the URL here. It's called nomoreransom.org. And this site provides a lot of great information about how to recover from ransomware. So they have a thing on here called Crypto Sheriff where you can upload the encrypted files from the impacted system, and it will try to figure out what is the particular piece of ransomware that's in use here and give you options for how to recover. If you don't want to upload files, you know what the ransomware is, you can go to their decryption tools section. You can see here I highlighted one called 777 ransom. If you know that's the one you've been infected with, there is a decryption tool available. They know how to decrypt that data. So you can download the tool and install it on the impacted system and use that tool to decrypt the compromised data. So they literally have hundreds of known ransomware variants on here that there are known decryption capabilities for. So if you are impacted, I would encourage you to check out this site because there might be a way for you to decrypt your data without you having to pay. So summing up, we want to, with regard to phishing, teach and reward good user behavior, establish policies and follow them, more carrot, less stick. Again, do not punish users for clicking on links that they shouldn't because they're going to do it. And we want them to feel comfortable coming forward and letting us know that it happened. With regard to ransomware, back up, test your backups, implement endpoint protection, and that includes patching and malware protection. So make sure you're doing all those things. Make sure you're installing your security patches. Setting up your policy ahead of time as to whether or not you're going to pay and how you want to handle incident response so that, again, you know what you're going to do if you're faced with it and you're not making it up on the fly. And then practice that incident response. Those are all really good things to do to be prepared for the threat of ransomware. So I will stop here. We've got a few minutes left for questions, and we'll be happy to take those.
Thanks so much, Chris. Any questions from the group? You can send it in, or I think for those of you who have your mics on, can certainly just ask the question. Any comments about experiences you're having that would be helpful to the group?
This is Colleen. I see that one person has posted a question. They asked if a copy of this presentation will be provided.
Yes, I will send that over to Hope and Colleen, and they can distribute that out to the group.
Great.
Any other questions, either written or verbal? Colleen, are you seeing anything on your end?
No more questions. There was just that one.
Okay.
I think everybody's on mute, so they would have to type in the question.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, then we'll give a couple more minutes to see if there are any other questions you might want to type in, and then we'll close the webinar. But while you're thinking about your questions to type in, certainly want to thank Chris for putting together this presentation. And I know it's always hard to figure out where your audience is, so I know some of you may have been thinking, well, I already know all that, and others, there are pieces you may not have heard before. So thank you, Chris, for figuring out how to reach a broad audience and provide excellent information and the resources too. So we are happy for you to take this presentation and share it with other folks on campus, not just the IT departments, but other folks, since obviously one of the major places these folks go for ransomware and other just email things to try to get into your system with both phishing and ransomware is to the business office. Certainly we would recommend that you might want to share this with your folks in the business office because they get all of these. Just this morning I got an email that said I had a free $50 Starbucks gift card. I will not be clicking on that to see whether that is real or not because I can't imagine that it is. So I think we all have to watch very carefully and see what may be coming in. I know others in our business offices have gotten messages, just as Chris mentioned today, that they had gotten one, and not only the one he mentioned earlier, but in the business office, but also one just very recently saying, please wire transfer this money to this address, and I know that's happened to our colleges. The president's offices have done that as well. So we're all affected by this, and Chris, we appreciate very much your work today to help us know more about addressing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we send the presentation out, my contact information is on the first slide, so if there are questions that come up, feel free to email me or tweet at me, and we'll make sure we can get you an answer.
Great. Okay, one last chance. Colleen, was anybody else sending forward a question?
No, no others right now.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for being on. We appreciate that. Hope you have found this useful. If you have some thoughts about other webinars we might want to do, please send Wood or me an email. We'll be happy to take a look at providing that. And again, hope you'll share this with others as we send this out to you. Thanks again, and thank you, Chris. And thanks, Colleen.